Hello and a huge welcome to you all spread around the globe. I'm Robin Daly. I'm delighted to have been invited to meet and greet you all and to introduce the projects that form the heart of today's event. I had a lot to do with the early days of setting up the Emergence Foundation, but once it was set up, I stepped back to focus on other things over the last couple of years. So it's a bit of a treat to get this plummy job today. So I want to make quite sure at the outset that everyone who's listening is aware that the event is being recorded. Of course, we're mainly recording the speakers, but nonetheless, you need to be aware of that. To get the best experience of today's event, I suggest that you select Speaker View from the top right-hand corner of your screen. So it's great to have so many of you here. This, of course, is the big plus about online events that we've all become so accustomed to now. More people from more places. At the very least, I'm aware of people signing in from the USA, quite a few over there, Switzerland, Israel, India, Costa Rica, Australia, and Italy. So we've got a mixed audience today of people who are familiar with the Emergence Foundation and its background, along with others who are not. But we're hoping to keep all of you interested and inspired with the material that we'll be sharing today. The Emergence Foundation is, I think, inspirational on at least two levels. The most obvious, of course, is the public-facing success it's had in funding a hugely diverse range of exciting projects, many of which may well have struggled to gain support elsewhere, not due to lack of merit, but because they simply don't fit inside the box of grant givers' guidelines. We're going to get a serious taste of this aspect of its success very soon. But I also want to mention here the incredible achievement of establishing Emergence in the first place. Without digging into too much detail, it suffices to say that the group of people who were to go on and set up the foundation came together extremely tentatively after the dramatic and traumatic end to an organization they'd all given heart and soul to. The journey from the first meeting to the launch of the first round of funding was long, arduous, and intense, requiring extraordinary commitment and staying power in order to find a way to start building common ground, trust, and ultimately a powerful shared vision. It was the kind of human alchemy that blows cynical ideas about the limitations of humanity clean out of the water, and that is now at the heart of the work of Emergence. So it's been a privilege to have played a part in what I'd call a triumph of the human spirit. But today we're going to be sampling the fruits of these efforts, getting a taste of some of the brilliant projects that the Foundation supported, as well as hearing about the common thread running through what, on the surface, are a wildly disparate range of initiatives. Now, I want to make sure you're aware of the ways you can participate in today's event. In the controls at the bottom of the screen, you'll find a reactions button, which you can use to show your appreciation in a whole range of ways. Also at the bottom, a few of you have already found the chat. Please use this to your heart's content to say hi to people, let us know where you're joining from, what you're enjoying about the event, about the presentations. Also, if you'd like to ask one of the project presenters a question, we'd really like that. So put that in the chat too, but help me out, please, by putting a nice big capital Q at the beginning so I can find it amongst the deluge of chit-chat. I shall be keeping a few minutes at the end of each live session to ask some of your questions. Now, as you'll know, if you've attended previous Emergence events that I've been the MC at, I shall be a stickler for timing, as we don't want the event to run over or for anyone's material to get squeezed out at the end of the event. So we'll be running a tight ship, which may mean putting the brakes on any section that's in danger of running over. And also that if you're late back from the break, you're going to miss something. So you have been warned. So settle back and soak up today's material. I'm confident you're going to be inspired and impressed. So now I want to hand over to Alison Manning, who's going to introduce us to the wider aims of Emergence Foundation and set the context for the event. Alison.
Hey, thanks a lot, Robin, and hello everybody, and welcome to this event. It's fabulous to see so many people here, and as Robin said, from so many corners of the world. I'm actually coming in from Amsterdam, and I'm sure there's lots of other places we haven't mentioned yet. So I wanted to follow on a little bit from what Robin said. Some of you obviously know our history, but some of you may not be aware of our history as Emergence Foundation. But we all came from a former organization, a spiritual organization that many of us have been involved with for like decades, like 4 decades. Can you believe it? And what had brought us together originally were a lot of really deep spiritual values. We cared a lot about collaboration, consciousness. We did a lot of meditation. We really were interested in freedom, expression, going deeply into ourselves. And this community had lots of ups and downs, as you can imagine. And but the Emergence Foundation formed properly in 2014, luckily having some money that came out of the previous organization. And we sat around going, okay, what are we going to do with this money? Because it's it was, a couple of £1 million, so we can do a lot with this money. What do we really feel like is going to be a true expression of who we are? And I think that's where those values came to the fore, because we wanted to do the work that we wanted to do in Emergence Foundation. We wanted to continue at that same sense of values, to be carrying those into different projects. So we came up with the idea of the Grant Giving Foundation. And I think what really motivated us was that we realized that we'd been quite a privileged community with people that we'd, often white middle class, we'd had a very privileged lifestyle. We could get involved. We were free. We were in this spiritual community. And when we had this money, we thought, what can we do with this money? And I think that was where diversity really came to the fore, because it was like we wanted to actually affect society in many different ways, not just a sort of in the pure consciousness meditation way, but across many different spectrums. And each of us in the Emergence Foundation, those of us that were in, very active in this core at this point, had different interests. I personally was very interested in women. How can we empower women? Many of us had ecological or sustainable, what a global warming. Other people had, like emphasis on meditation and mindfulness. How can we, use mindfulness in many different ways? So it was like 1,000 flowers bloomed. And that was what was amazing, because it was like we were looking for people who applied to us. We were looking for, where was that passion? Where was that sort of a philosophical basis that they wanted to really do something in society that was going to make a difference, that was carrying through their own passion, but going to make a difference in their communities, and however you would define communities. So we've, I think we're really moved. I personally am moved, you can see, by the breadth and depth of what we've been able to achieve in a relatively short period of time, and often funding groups that would never have got money elsewhere. These were projects that were, not considered the normal, impact. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't be moving my hands around with this background. But not the sort of normal things that people would get funded. So that is very exciting for us and for our grantees, that they've been able to explore areas of consciousness or applying those philosophical ideas into very practical. So it was like we took the inner development that we personally had done, and we were taking it into tangibly manifesting it in the outside world. So really bringing it into all sorts of people. So it could be Muslim women in the East End, to children here in the Netherlands going to a question project, to going to a sanctuary in North Wales and relating to nature. So there's a huge range. And I think that's what we've tried to show in our event today, that there's a huge range of projects, but I would also really encourage you to check out our website, because there's a load more projects on our website that can give you the breadth and depth of who and what we are and what we're still trying to achieve. So I want to now take you over to Simon Town, our fabulous grants administrator, who has worked tirelessly with us over the last few years to actually administer our grants. And Simon's going to tell us a bit more about the practical details of our range of projects. So over to you, Simon.
Very much, Alison. So I'm just going to run through a brief overview through 5 slides. So Tim, if you can put up the first slide, please. So as I said, I'm just one person in the grants assessment team who have been working over the last few years with Emergence Foundation. Next slide, please, Tim. So here are just a few of the facts about the fund over the last 3 years. So the fund for distribution is £1.4 million, and of that we have to date allocated and spent £950,000. There are 7 rounds anticipated, and 5 of those are complete to date. We have received 145 full applications, not including the most recent round, of which 62 have been supported. This is a success rate of about 43%, which in grant funding terms is a very high proportion. Of the people supported, 24 have been individual applications, and there have been 38 organisational applications. 51 of those applications are from UK grantees, 51 grantees, and 11 are abroad. In terms of the amount remaining in the fund, there is £465,000 remaining for allocation in the next 2 rounds, which is about 33% of the overall budget. Next slide, please, Tim. So looking at where the beneficiaries of these schemes are, you can see on the left-hand side the UK and Ireland. So there are 12 that are effectively UK-wide projects. And then there are 18 in London, 5 in Wales as an illustration, and 4 in Brighton and Hove. There's various spread across the regions, but these are the actual location of the beneficiaries. You can see that there's 1 in Northern Ireland and there are 3 in Southern Ireland. Looking to the right of the slide, in terms of the wider area, there are 3 projects which have been across all eligible countries, beneficiaries across all eligible countries. There have been 4 that have specifically operated within the Netherlands, 3 in each of Austria, Germany and Ireland, 2 in Greece, Israel, Spain, Sweden and Switzerland, and 1 in each of Belgium, Denmark, France, Italy and Portugal. So that's where the beneficiaries are. Next slide, please, Tim. So overall, and this is only over the first 3 rounds, we think conservatively there are about 7,000 plus beneficiaries who have been impacted by the projects. Next slide, please, Tim. So this is a sample taken from about 50 people, 50 individuals, and this is to demonstrate the impact on individuals. And we have looked across a range of parameters which, if you like, make up the X factor, the impact that EF wanted to achieve. And you can see round the edge there are a whole variety of different parameters. If you look at the grey in the middle, the grey circle, that is where people started off. These are self-completion questionnaires that individuals completed both before and after the projects. So on average, if you look where the arrow is, people started off in terms of awareness of new ideas and or perspectives at a rating of 4.9. And then by the end of these projects, they had achieved a rating, rating of 8. So you can see that there has been a significant impact from where people started off on the projects to where they ended up. So another point about this slide is clearly not all schemes will deliver across all parameters. So this takes account of that and just covers all of the projects that people have been involved in. But you can see that there has been an increased impact of some significance for individuals from their involvement in the projects to date. Next slide, please, Tim. So I just wanted to end up with a little word about COVID-19, which has been on many people's minds. It has impacted most schemes that we have funded. There's only a few that have been completely unaffected. Unfortunately, one project terminated because the charity dissolved, and that was because their scheme was based on very vulnerable people and it was about face-to-face work, and that just became impossible for the charity to continue. In general terms, EF approach took an early stance, which was to be understanding of the difficulties of COVID, that we would allow appropriate and reasonable variations to take account, the necessary account of COVID, and we just asked people to keep us informed, and we allowed people to via budget as necessary. Another thing we said was that we wanted to create some absolute time limit for project completion, otherwise schemes could just go on, but that was a generous allowance, we would like to think. And it was also decided that EF simply did not have the financial capacity to be a specialist COVID funder. There were many other organisations offering specialist COVID funding, but what we aimed to do was just to support the applicants in the necessary changes in the delivery of the projects that they originally applied for. Thanks very much. That's it from me for now.
Thanks very much, Simon Allison. So now to our first project. This is a project which is run by Anthea Lawson. It's called Perspectiva, The Inner Life of Activism, a field inquiry into the relationship between spiritual development and societal change. Now, Anthea actually can't be with us today, so we've got a recording of her in dialogue with Steve Brett talking about the project. I've already seen it. She's amazing. I think you're going to love this.
Well, Anthea, this is fabulous. You know, we're really sorry you won't be able to join us for the event, but thank you so much for being willing to talk with us about your project.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
I was really excited about your project because I thought this is exactly, you know, fits with inner development into the whole field of activism. It was so much fitted with what was behind our grant giving.
Well, I have to say I was equally excited to see your call for applications when you first started, because it's the first time I'd seen a funder really speaking so explicitly about the place where our inner lives and our potential for development meet the changes that we want to make in the outside world. So yeah, so my background is as well, first as a journalist. I started out as a reporter at the Times, but after a few years I left that and I went to do campaigning in NGOs, which I did for a decade and a half. I worked for Amnesty, I worked for Christian Aid, I worked for Global Witness, and I was doing investigations. I was using my journalistic skills to look at human rights abuses, to look at environmental damage caused by corporations.
Right.
So there were some successes in that, but at the same time, I was starting to feel that there were limits to what I was doing, and I was experiencing real sort of concerns, both in a sort of cognitive thinking way and also sort of deeper in my being about it. One of them was that in the time I was spending in the mountains, climbing and walking to recover from my campaigning exertions during the week, I was coming to a deeper green awareness and realising the extent to which we completely need to change our relationship to the biosphere and the basis of life, and that the kinds of changes that I was arguing for were ultimately tweaks within a system that is still based on extraction. I was also realising that we were, and all NGOs were, and all campaigning seemed to be, mimicking aspects of the systems that we wanted to change. And the ways in which I was most aware I was doing it at that point, I now realise much more, was that we were sort of mimicking the sort of Homo economicus assumptions of a rational actor, on which is based the economic systems that we're trying to change. And we were effectively doing the same thing by putting reports full of carefully sourced facts that I'd made sure that we could publish without ending up in a libel court, putting these facts in front of the policymaker and expecting them to change. Now, that was working, and to an extent, under New Labour. Under certain regimes, when I was starting out campaigning, that was working. But since 2010, that has been working a lot less. And so a few years ago, when I was starting to realise this, that was part of it. I was also noticing the way that we weren't always treating the people we were working with or who we were trying to help very well. And in my deeper self, I was experiencing, and I didn't really have the words for it at the time, a sort of desiccation that I can now understand in slightly more spiritual terms, that came from only using a small proportion of my capabilities, the sort of rational thinking, arguing side. And it was leaving the rest of me sort of stuck and blocked. And I wanted to be feeling more whole in the way that I was doing my work, in a way that the entire model of that kind of NGO policy campaigning just did not have space for. Right. So I left my job as a campaigns director, and during that time got to know Perspectiva, which was just starting up, as an organisation, a research organisation that was thinking about the ways in which we need to make changes in our inner lives in order to bring more effective change in the world outside. It's not a campaign group, it's definitely a thinking and talking, talking about it and sharing ideas group. But there seemed to be some synergies between what we were thinking. And so I started thinking about activism, and it was at that point that I came to you with this idea to develop a project that was about the relationship between spiritual development and societal change.
It's great to get a picture of how the whole thing grew and developed in yourself. What did the grant enable you to actually do?
What I wanted to do was put in context all of these feelings with which and intuitions and senses with which I'd left what I was doing. So I needed to talk to other activists, first of all, to find out the extent to which those understandings were shared. And they were. And people were saying, yes, we do need to talk about this. And what was interesting was that, well, what was interesting for me, because there was an aspect of having to recognise my own privilege as a white middle-class person working in well-funded NGOs, the extent to which I'd been shielded from having to grapple with some of these issues, that people who've been fighting for their lives rather than choosing to intervene on behalf of others,
that's a great point,
might have had to grapple with much more quickly. What this project has enabled us to do is find a frame and a way of talking about the links between our inner lives and the change that we want to bring in the world, and a way of explaining also why it matters. It's quite easy for people who are very busy trying to change the world to say, well, why should we attend to what's going on inside? Why should we be looking at this when things are so urgent? Why also should we be giving ammunition to the other side who would love to find ways to criticise us? Why should we be sort of looking at this stuff that allows them to say, oh, right, well, you really are hypocritical and righteous and so on. We've always been saying this about you. But actually, I think it's not a submission to power to look at how power runs through us and can make us its agent. The frame that we've come to is the idea of entangled activism. We are entangled in what it is that we're trying to change. And we're entangled in multiple ways. Now, that can sound quite straightforward. I mean, obviously, we're entangled in the systems we're trying to change. We want to leave fossil fuels in the ground, and yet we're dependent for all the basics of life on them. Some of it's a bit deeper at the next level down and slightly harder to see. The ways in which we are driving ourselves to burnout, working relentlessly to try and change systems that are themselves based on endless work and endless extraction. So we're running that system within ourselves. The way that we're talking about rights and justice and yet not treating people well. The way that we're shouting loudly to save others from harm while perhaps placating some of our own needs for recognition and security. But some of it's at the very deepest level, this entanglement of how we see the world. Now, that very basic phrase that people always used about me, that my mum's friends would use about me when I started campaigning, oh, you're off saving the world. We're trying to change the world. It's in that grammatical structure. We, the subject, are trying to change the world, the object. Now, that is an entanglement, I think, in the deepest perceptions of liberal Enlightenment modernity. The scientific revolution, which allowed us to start to see the world in objective terms, that put us as the Cartesian subject and everything else as the object.
Yes.
We carry that into our campaigning. This isn't sort of just of sort of intellectual interest. I think it's strategically really important, because if we think the problem is over there in this object that we're trying to change or help, and that we are not the problem, then we're making the strategic error of locating the problem in the wrong place. The world that we are trying to change, these systems that we're trying to change, have had an effect on us, and it's actually one of the deepest effects of that system is to convince us that we are separate. You know, that's the great sort of triumph of individualism, is to make us think that we're separate from things. And so here we are using these very useful tools that have given us the language and the structures of human rights, for example, very helpfully, to try and free people from oppression. And yet baked into those ideas about individualism are a way of perceiving in a subject and object way that completely goes against the kind of intersubjective relating that would truly change how we come into relation with everyone and everything who's not us.
So practically, how did you go about bringing this material out from people?
So a lot of it was in conversations. I interviewed a lot of activists, and it came up in those conversations. We also used some of the funding to do a couple of events. We did a sort of more intensive workshop where we were working with Sophie Banks, who's a really amazing facilitator who's got a background in psychotherapy and in systems thinking, to bring in her way of looking at how the systems that we're trying to change manifest through group systems, and what happens in the movements and groups that we're in trying to do our campaigning. And activists came to that from a really wide variety of issues that they were working on and types of organisations. And we also did a big event which was aimed at people who, I suppose, are self-identifying as activists, as well as people who are not identifying as activists, because I'm interested also in the way that when we define ourselves as activists, and that idea, when we take on that identity, it's like we sort of put on a sort of cloak of I'm the activist, and immediately something happens in how we are interacting with people who are uncomfortable with
That's
that.
interesting.
And including, I mean, of course, there'll be people who want to sort of go like that and don't want anything to do with it, as we've seen with this legislation that's going through at the moment, protest. And then while I've been doing that, I've been writing a book to put it together.
Is that you're still working on that book, or
it's coming very soon? It's hopefully in May.
I can't wait to read it.
It's called The Entangled Activist, Learning to Recognise the Master's Tools. I wanted to do something to really bring together all of what's happening. And it felt like the way to do it that was most appropriate for me to be able to speak about this, because I had to sort of own my own entanglements in this, my own story of how I've come to see this, felt like the best way to try and convey it. And that's complicated, because here I am ultimately saying we need to do some work on ourselves, right? So the conclusion is if we're entangled, the first thing we have to do is stop denying it. The first thing we have to do is acknowledge it, and then see what that does to change our starting point. And actually it changes quite a lot, making that mental shift. But some of the work to be done for people who've been coming to their activism with privilege of various forms, and I'm included in that category, is perhaps to step back and say, well, this isn't about me. If I'm truly going to do this from a position of service rather than meeting all of my own subconscious and unacknowledged needs, then it's going to look very differently. The work that I do in solidarity is going to look different. And so the book is a reflection on the activism that I have done through the insights I have gained through this project.
Fantastic. How has it impacted people, and how are they seeing the effect in their own lives of the work?
In the short term, I suppose in the events, we've seen that thing where participants are, when you can see, because you've experienced it yourself, that moment where somebody's going, oh, and something's landing. And then I think this fits into a wider process that's going on, and a lot of it is already explicit around the issues of power and privilege and representation.
Yes.
And some of it also is about questions of sort of martyrdom and sacrifice and burnout and some of those questions. And these are all sort of live issues, and there are ways to bring them together. And I think this kind of thinking can help bring them together and see what's going on.
Right.
And there are other things as well. So I think there's a cultural moment here that this fits into, of activism becoming, and culture, actually, because activism is only part of culture, but it's both, really, becoming more aware of itself.
Yes.
You know, at the same time, this is happening also because there's a lot of activism going on. And the reason there's a lot of activism going on is because stuff is up politically, right? Polarization is happening. The effect of social media is profound. The end game of neoliberalism and the effects of repeated sort of like layers of austerity kicking in is producing a whole generation of radicalized people, ongoing injustices that have been going on for a long time and that are now being expressed in ways that reach more people because of the way that social media works. So old stories are being brought home to new people, I suppose. All of that, and then the reaction to it, which is, you know, we have right-wing governments that are quite willing to stoke culture war in their terms and to take away fundamental freedoms in order to disguise the fact
yes,
what they're up to economically, and to try and keep the vote of people whom they're actually harming in material and economic terms. Or, you know, all of that there is the context, and so we need to resource ourselves.
We do, because the power, we don't have the power as such.
And I find it really heartening, like some of the conversations I have with people in their early 20s, even late teens, they have just instantly got already.
They've got it.
In terms of like structurally understanding the interconnections of the systemic problem, they are there in a way that I wasn't until I was into my 30s. And that's cultural emergence. That's great.
Yeah. God, do we need it?
And yet, you know, the ongoing problems caused by human psychology and, you know, our inability to sort of get to grips with ourselves will always arise, which is why I think there's always a need for this work.
Great to talk with you, Anthea. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And look forward to staying in touch. It's great.
Wow. Well, it was a great second time as well. Amazing video, I think. Very stimulating. So great. I'm sure lots of you listening to that have had a go at a little bit of activism of one kind or another, and will recognize the kind of things that she's talking there about. What's her phrase? Entangled activism. Yeah. A few comments coming up here. Anthea's opening up this question in such a clear way. I think her book's going to be a must read. Love the interview, very alive. Yeah, a lot of people looking forward to the book. Fantastic work. Can EF please send a recap of resources of the presentations, e.g. for this book, the name of Anthea's book, also the name of the systems thinker she worked with. So that's a good point for the team. Get some resources together at the end. So much depth of insight. Indeed, as an activist, I'm relating to this immensely. So really great. So we've hit the ground running. That was a great start. So our second project features Bernadette Calvi. Bernadette, would you like to put your hand up to bring yourself up to the top? Bernadette ran a project. It's called the Cumbria Action for Sustainability. This is a zero carbon Cumbria, training community trainers in events on climate science and solutions across Cumbria. Hi, Bernadette. Lovely to have you here. Thanks so much for coming along today to present your project to us. Off you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can we have the first slide, please, Tim? So good afternoon, everybody. I'm really pleased to be with you this afternoon. It's such a privilege to be here and to tell you all about our project in Cumbria, in CAFS. So we work with individuals, communities, businesses and local authorities across Cumbria to reduce the county's carbon footprint and to bring about a more sustainable way of life here. We manage and deliver events, advice, training, practical projects and specialist consultancy services. Now, we've been a sustainability charity for about 22 years, but 8 years ago, Inspired by the Centre for Alternative Technologies Zero Carbon Britain report, our vision became a zero carbon Cumbria, a county with improved quality of life, with thousands of low carbon jobs created to produce and deploy renewable energy at scale, to provide warmer homes and integrated accessible public transport. A lot of our work is about empowering others, building skills of sustainability, developing confidence and agency, and encouraging communities to work together. Reducing the emissions from domestic energy is vital, and we are testing new technologies to understand heat loss from buildings. We run degree-level courses for tradespeople in retrofitting energy efficiency. We have draft-proofed hundreds of homes, trained hundreds of people, and given energy advice directly to thousands. We showcase some of the incredible activity in the county by holding events, sometimes in people's homes, sometimes at building sites, sometimes on farms, in our annual Green Build and Sustainable Living Festival. Another hugely important part of our work is around community-led sustainability. For example, we seed-funded a new social enterprise, Community Energy Cumbria, and among other community energy groups, right across the county. And they raised almost £1 million so far to build community-owned renewable energy schemes. We've been supporting communities in other ways through a whole place approach in Alston Moor for the past 3 years, advising on housing and energy, transport, food, and leading to significant embedded policy change. And another thing we do is educate. Could we have the next slide, please? So something massive has happened around climate change in the last year, 18 months. Public mood has changed. People feel frightened and overwhelmed and are crying out for concrete knowledge about science and solutions so that they can drive the change and create a better world. All across Cumbria, the country, the globe, people are calling for strong action on climate change. And we just heard from Anthea about how activism is increasing. At CAFS, never before have we had such a surge in demand for our work. People have woken up to the fact that we face a climate emergency, that the early impacts are here and that they are hurting people we love. In Cumbria, amongst many, many places, we're on the front line, and people know that there is a very small but very real window of opportunity to turn this around, and they need solutions. So why did we want to work with the Emergence Foundation? Well, we've been approached by community groups who want us to help them, to support them to turn their feelings of helplessness into positive action. Simultaneously, demand for trainers on climate science and solutions is outstripping our capacity to respond. So we want to see individuals feeling empowered to train other people and to drive the changes that they want to see. We want to see organisations and individuals developing a better sense of agency and responsibility, and a much better understanding of the causes of and solutions to the climate crisis. And we want to see emissions reduced as a result. At the deepest level, we believe that this project could really change the dynamic in the county. Next slide, please. So we applied for funding, and having heard that we've been successful with our application, we celebrated, and then we decided, what are we going to achieve? After some delays due to the pandemic, there was a recruitment campaign for the coordinator role, and I started in December at the end of last year. At the end of January this year, we advertised for volunteers to join our project. We were overwhelmed with the response. It was a challenge to choose a team of just 20 volunteers from the large numbers of people in Cumbria with a drive and a passion to want to make a change in what we all understand about the climate crisis. So I thought it might be useful for you to hear why some people applied to do this. John says, I live in an isolated area of West Cumbria. Lockdown has amplified how siloed my community is and opened my eyes to the difficulties we all face. Anne-Marie said, I would also enjoy the opportunity to be part of a network of volunteers. During these disjointed times, it feels especially good to foster purposeful community. So my role as the project coordinator is not only to recruit, train and support this team, but to empower them, improve their confidence in supporting their communities, in developing a sense of agency and responsibility in making changes. All of this happening during COVID meant that we've taken the whole project online. And while there were some inevitable delays, we have succeeded in creating a team who are ready to fulfill the aims of the project. CAF's aims, as well as the Emergence Foundation's aim, which perfectly sums our project up, and that being to support individuals and organisations who are inspired by a depth of purpose to improve the quality of life of individuals, enhance communities, and benefit the environment through educational projects which affect a shift in consciousness or perspective that provides a force for positive change in the world. Next slide, please. So how is it going? Our 20-strong team are delighted to have been chosen. Fliss said last week, "I believe that the climate crisis is the most urgent problem we face, and I'm ashamed of my generation's failure to recognise this and act much sooner. But we can only start from where we are, with positive action like that of CAF's, and I'm eager to play a role in that change." Each of our volunteers, who have a varied background in climate science, but a shared passion in talking to people, have already received a full day of accredited carbon literacy training from me. This is a highly interactive training session which builds confidence as well as knowledge. And the next step is to support them in delivering training and improving their delivery skills and confidence. And we will do this as a supportive community of like-minded individuals, sharing knowledge and expertise as well as resources, and by buddying up with other volunteer trainers. By May, they should be working in their own communities and networks to deliver short climate science and solution sessions or conversation cafes to interested groups based on a resource we've developed for them. We'll meet regularly during the remainder of the project to support each other and to share successes and challenges. Next slide, please. So, although the project's end point is the end of this September, this year we want to leave a legacy. The volunteers will have received the tools to continue working with communities beyond that point. And we want, like ripples on a pond, to continue to have spheres of influence in the future. Every person who takes part in a session with the volunteers will be given signposts to more information, local sustainability networks they can join or form, and the opportunity to find out how to reduce their own carbon footprint. They will be encouraged to talk to others and to spread the key messages of the sessions. And alongside this project, CAFS is also part of the Zero Carbon Cumbria project, which is working towards the shared aim of making Cumbria the first carbon neutral county in the UK by 2037. The ZCC partnership is co-chaired by CAFS and Cumbria County Council and involves around 70 public, private and third sector organisations. And you can see some of these organisations on this slide. It's an ambitious and inspiring challenge that will touch on many aspects of life in Cumbria to bring the county's greenhouse gas emissions to net zero. One part of this work is an exciting 5-year programme of community activity to help people reduce their footprint, particularly from food, waste and the goods we buy. And it's all been made possible thanks to a £2.5 million grant from the National Lottery Climate Action Fund, which CAFS bid for on behalf of the partnership. And we will deliver a range of projects ranging from repair cafes, citizens' juries, youth engagement, and also then launching a new major county-wide programme of full-day accredited climate and carbon literacy training, which some of our volunteers may well be involved with. So our vision is a zero carbon Cumbria, a county with improved quality of life and people living in balance with their environment. The science says we must, the technology says we can, it's time to say we will. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic, Bernadette. Yeah, really great. Such a practical program of sort of taking people from reading lots of scary headlines to actually telling them what they can do. Really good. There's questions pouring in over here. Some of them I think you at least partly answered on the way, but let's see how we get on here. Let's ask you, how has the project impacted you personally?
Wow, that's a really good question. Well, I've only worked with CAFS from the beginning of December when I started this new role, and I think for me it's focused my own understanding. You know, I was very much in all previous roles, very much I've worked with carbon literacy previously. I have a very sustainable approach to my own life, but it's made me tune in much more to the impact on me in the whole project. And it's been challenging and satisfying, and I feel like I'm making a difference with it personally.
I think you are. So what have you found to be the biggest challenge that you've come across?
I think it's double-edged. I think it's communicating with everybody virtually. But I think we've benefited from that. I know that some of the volunteers were really looking forward to being in front of groups, and while we can't do that yet, it's a dissatisfaction for some of them, and the technology often doesn't help. But I think it helps us reach more people. I think it makes what we're doing more accessible.
Mm-hmm. Now, this one you've certainly said something about, but maybe you want to say a little more. It says, thank you, Bernadette. Are you working with other similar organisations to create a network of like-minded groups across the UK?
I think there are certainly links with other counties and their approaches to becoming net zero carbon, yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any plans to take on further groups of trainers, maybe even to outreach to visitors, as so many people love your beautiful county?
Well, because the project is only running up until September, it's taken us quite a long while to get through the recruitment process and the training process. I would like to focus on the group of trainers that we have and ensure that they have the support that they have to complete this, rather than employing or recruiting a further group.
Right. Why is Cumbria in particular so aware of the climate threat and so interested in responding? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we've been hit by the impacts of climate change a lot, as many places have been around the world. But over the last 10 years or so, we've had 3 major flooding episodes from 2005, so it's a bit more than 10 years ago. 2005, 2012 and 2015, we had major flooding across the north and the centre of Cumbria, and so it's impacted a lot of people personally.
Mm-hmm. Do you anticipate your work could have significant effects beyond Cumbria?
We would like to think so. Yes. Yeah, we've made some links with.
As well.
Yeah, we've made some links with a couple of other counties who are thinking of doing something similar. So we're very happy to support them in from what we've learned.
Excellent. So spreading. Look, there's a bevy of great supportive comments in here. Fantastic work. Thank you. So inspiring. Excellent project. Very inspiring. Really inspiring work, Bernadette. So people are loving what you're doing. Clearly. Thank you so much for your work and for sharing it with us. Very inspiring. Powerful example of transformation, collaboration, and sustainability. So. Yeah, wonderful stuff. So look, I'm going to say a big thank you to you for presenting to us today. It's definitely been appreciated, and we're very proud to have been able to support your project. So thanks, Bernadette.
Thank you for the opportunity and for supporting us. Thank you. Okay,
so we're on to project 3. Paula, if you'd like to put your hand up. Thank you very much, Paula. So this is Paula Haddock, Mindful Action on Whiteness. So this is a program that's designed for those racialized as white to understand and address systemic racism and inequality. So certainly an unusual project. Paula, big welcome to you. Thanks so much for coming on today to tell us all about it.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. Great, shall I fire away?
Yes, do.
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Paula Haddock. I got £10,000 as an individual grant to run this project called Mindful Action on Whiteness. I spent 10 years working in international development prior to working on this, and the last 5 years working with grassroots activists. And I also trained to be a mindfulness teacher, and I co-organise an international network called the Mindfulness and Social Change Network. But over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I've been focusing a lot more on anti-racism work, slowly doing a lot of self-work and thinking about and trying to understand what anti-racism work looks like in practice. And talking about race and racism and whiteness can be a really difficult, really painful, triggering, emotional work. And it's been a really liberating journey with forming many rich relationships, with a lot of learning and a lot of greater compassion for myself and others, and a much deeper sense of interconnectedness. And I'm really grateful for the Emergence Foundation for funding this work. So I haven't prepared a presentation to put up a PowerPoint. I thought it might just be better to speak about this topic a little bit more, just without the visuals. And I also am conscious in even doing this presentation that this work also applies to all of us in this room. We all, whether we like it or not, have been given a sort of racial code, and that does affect the way that we if it affects our sort of part of society, how we're treated, what privileges we have, and ways in which we are oppressed by the systems we live in. So I wanted to start off by just sort of acknowledging that, and also, you know, as I'm presenting, it may also just be interesting as you're listening to just think about, oh, how is this landing for me? Like how is this topic, how is this theme sitting with me? What comes up in my own mind as I'm listening, and also what comes up in my body? And that might include curiosity and interest. It might also include a little bit of like physical discomfort, a little bit of tension or resonance as well. So I thought I'd start with a couple of definitions. So the project is called Mindful Action on Whiteness, and there's many definitions, and the definitions of whiteness is really shifts over time and in different contexts. But a couple of definitions I've got here. One is that whiteness is a constantly shifting boundary separating those who are entitled to have certain privileges from those whose exploitation and vulnerability to violence is justified by their not being white. And this is closely connected to this idea of, or this reality of white supremacy, which is defined as historically based, institutionally perpetuated system of exploitation and oppression of continents, nations, and peoples of colour by white people for the purpose of maintaining and defending a system of wealth, power, and privilege. And of course, as we listen to that, when I was reading these things in the days when I started exploring this more, it's like, no, none of that applies to me. I don't believe that. I'm not part of that. That's not how I was raised. And the challenge for many white people in doing, in exploring this, is realizing that we are born into this more as part of a system. So as the activist Layla Saar talks about it, this is more of an ideology, a paradigm, a worldview that gets integrated into legislation, social conditioning, institutions, that heralds in many different ways, sometimes in very covert, sometimes in overt, sometimes in unconscious ways, of this idea of white being superior, better, more worthy, credible, deserving. And unfortunately, even our lack of awareness, of understanding around this, is also part of the system that protects unearned, that sort of it ends up with individuals having unearned privileges, protection, and power based on this categorization. So I started doing some work on this. I realized that even in the sector I worked in, which was international development and activism, where there's this tendency to think about sort of being on the right side of history, being a good person, that there was still, that the oppression was still taking place, there was still discrimination, there was still a sense of sort of white, the dominance of white ideas, white norms, still a lot of difficulty of even talking about racism, acknowledging that it exists. So I applied for funding from the Emergence Foundation because I had done some work called whiteness groups. I'd been part of a whiteness group and found that really helpful. And so I set up 4 new groups to explore whether or not there were particular methodologies that could work to help white people do the work of dismantling something that we get born into this system. and that's mainly what the project was focused on. So what do we need to unlearn or learn as white people? What are the barriers to doing this work? What methods would help, and what role could this work play in the broader system of anti-racism work? So I chose 4 groups to work with, and also set up an oversight group. And there's a couple of members of the oversight group at this meeting today, so it's really good to have Dean and Aisha here. And these groups have been running since October. Every 2 or 3 weeks, we've been meeting for an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we've been working through a workbook together called Me and My White Supremacy, which I'll explain a bit in a moment. And one of the important things about setting up these groups was to set them up as like peer learning groups, not me training. I'm not an expert in this area, but for me training and for me just supporting the group to be in place, and then having the groups self-facilitate. So we rotated facilitation. And I should say, I'm just sharing initial findings. We haven't done our evaluation yet. We're doing that on Wednesday. So what did we learn? Well, I should say who came. Well, let's just start by saying it was mostly women. Unfortunately, not as many men signed up to do this work. There was some class variation in people who came, and there were some people from different different religious backgrounds and also different nationalities. The work required really strong container building to build some trust and some comfort in doing this work. People were very nervous about exploring this topic. We spent the first few sessions sort of getting to know each other, thinking about how racism has been part of our own histories, or our knowledge of racism, or experiences of racism, or experience of understanding ourselves as white people. Where did that come from? And then we started to go through this workbook, which is called the Me and My White Supremacy Workbook, which is now actually a book. It's called Me and White Supremacy, which Layla Saad's published. And this book goes through a whole bunch of topics, including things like, what is white silence? What is white apathy? What is white fragility? What does tone policing mean? What's cultural appropriation? And the book is really about trying to understand and unpick ways in which those things exist within us. It's not just looking at it as a theoretical concepts, but like, how do we identify things within ourselves? And so it's quite an intense sort of piece of work to do, but also incredibly liberating to start to acknowledge and be able to find language to talk about these things. And so this is the most of the learning that came out of doing these groups, was that people found that they did recognize unconscious prejudices within themselves, that they recognized that they were manifesting behaviors of things like denial or inaction or fragility of being called out. Some people not really thinking that this was anything they had to do, not really seeing themselves as being part of this system which privileges people on the basis of a social coding, which race is. People found it really helpful that they now had sort of a new language, that they could see that this was something that was manifesting, and that it was both kind of something that they had like absorbed from that it wasn't something that was sort of inherently within them, but it was something that they absorbed from culture around them, but that also it was also something they were responsible for dismantling and for recognizing. People were able to reframe their emotional experience of shame and guilt, which is often what happens when we talk about racism, is that there's a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, and that shut people down. And they were able to reframe that, rather than being something painful that meant they shouldn't do this work, rather it meaning something that was kind of natural, but that also it's important to move beyond and not be held back by. And most people felt that they were becoming more conscious of race-related issues generally. There's loads more to say, but I'm going to jump ahead because I'm going to run out of time. One of the main sort of impacts of doing this work actually came from the oversight group itself. So I set the oversight group up so that I was accountable to somebody. I'm just an individual doing this work, and I wanted to have an accountability mechanism for me, people to feed back to me about whether what I was doing was the right thing, whether I was, and helping me to think about what to consider, materials to use, ways to go about doing the groups. And so actually one of the really interesting things that we learned from this was that in a way, even creating groups of white people to talk about race without thinking about creating spaces for people of color to think about how, what support they need, what learning they might need, what sort of how to build resilience. In a way, even that centered whiteness again, that it was me who got funded as a white person, that it was white people that got supported, and white people who built networks and built skills. So a lot of what we talked about in the oversight group was like the need to invest in a future project that actually balances out the support, and in fact like readdresses the balance. So we're developing a new proposal to bid for people of colour to have groups to be able to do some of this work, and for them to be able to come together in multiracial spaces. And that was the second thing that really came out of the learning, was the importance of, actually it's important to do this work as individual, in some ways in white groups, because otherwise you put emotional labor on people of colour to do this work for you. But that actually there is also the need to have multiracial spaces. People come together and talk about this in person, to see and feel and hear and have a sensory embodied experience of how this othering happens and how we can dismantle it together. And actually the oversight group in and of itself became a sort of hub for people who were part of that, who were mainly people of colour, a few white allies, to build their own solidarity and create a vision for a future together. So that's how we're moving forward. We're developing a new bid to follow on from this project, and we're also exploring how we can support those who have been part of these groups, which are nearly finishing, to think about how do they take their new raised consciousness and understanding and resilience around their own dismantling of their own whiteness into future work that they do. I think I'll stop there. There's loads more to say, but thanks.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, look, the chat has been filling up like mad over here. You're obviously prompting lots of response from our audience. Amazing project. Yeah, look, let's just wade in and address a few of these questions if we can. There's lots of comment as well, but let's ask a question or two. I often think of white privilege as something inherited from the past that I experience today, but in what ways do you think these ideas are being reinforced today, or are we in a period of fundamentally dismantling it?
I don't think we are in a period of dismantling as much as we need to be. I mean, I think that obviously the death of George Floyd last year sparked off a sort of an understanding, particularly among white people, around how racism still exists and how it's sort of institutionalized and is systemic. It's not just about one individual holding an ideology. It's actually something that's much more systems based. And there unfortunately, you know, that this isn't new. There have been decade after decade, year after year, reports to demonstrate the ways that inequality still plays out. So this isn't something that is just something historical, and it's still something, as we've just seen. Well, just last week there was a report which was produced by the Commission of Race and Ethnicity Disparity report, and even in that you see a lot of the ideology around, you know, racism not existing. We're beyond that. That's in the past. There are other factors that play out more. The sort of denial still very much inherent within the systems. But fortunately, I also think there is a groundswell of understanding, particularly in the last couple of years, and there are a lot more people sort of wanting to do this work, wanting to talk about it, wanting to make changes in their organization, not always knowing how, but really wanting to sort of come together and make some serious change.
So that's inspiring, yeah. Right, such important work. How did you recruit group members? Any thoughts on how this work reaches out to people who wouldn't necessarily sign up for this work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think this work takes a lot of trust, and so I reached out to organizations that I'm already connected to who knew me, and I think it's, you know, there is something about just you know, understanding who you're working with, and the people who did the group all more or less knew each other, all were connected underneath an umbrella. I think that the people who did this work kind of had already got to the realization that they needed to do some work. Either somebody had told them they needed to do some work, or they had started doing their own work and they'd started to read books and they started to say, wow, I really need to do something. So yes, this project was definitely aimed at people who had gone so far already, but then they just didn't know what to do and they wanted to do it in a group context.
Right. I can see it's something that to explore on your own is a difficult one, really. It requires sort of interaction, really, to get beneath the surface of it.
Yes and no. There's a lot of material out there these days, which is very accessible and is very much being written for white people to do this work. But I think what happens is that people go away and they do their learning, and they don't really, either they don't find they do it in as much depth, or they just don't still find the confidence. One of the problems with racism, one of the reasons it's so powerful, is that we don't talk about it enough. People are afraid to say, afraid to use terms. They're afraid to even say black person because they're not sure if that's the right term. They're afraid to say
right.
racism, or they're afraid to identify themselves as white because they don't know, you know, am I being racist in doing that? Is somebody going to call me out? Am I going to get told that I've done something to hurt somebody? And people have so much fear around it that we can't get the words out, and there's so much emotional reactivity that also it can be hard. So doing it in a group context was really the key to this project. It was developing that confidence.
Okay, and did you have groups with a mix of white and non-white? And if yes, what were the outcomes?
No, so these groups were very specifically for white people to do the work, and the intention behind that was that a lot of white people don't feel like they have the confidence to talk about what's really going on for them, and that obviously if you're in a space with people of color, there's also the risk that, you know, yeah, it's going to hurt, it's going to trigger to say, God, I've thought that before, or I've done that, or so in a way, part of the reason for doing it was like white people taking the responsibility for the emotional labor, not asking people of color to do the work for them, and also not putting people of color into a space where they are having to listen to white people sort of realize, sometimes for the first time, that this exists, that it, you know, that it manifests. It's like, so the idea was yeah, it was sort of set up for that reason. However, I think what we learned from having the oversight group, which was so key, was that whilst that work is really important to do in these separate groups, it's also really important to come together, that should be part of any project, because that's where the real anti-racism work starts. The work I was doing with people really was like pre-anti-racism work, to get people to the point where they were able to really be in a multiracial space, and, you know, kind of have a bit more understanding of themselves and how this was also part of them and not separate from them. And yes, the oversight group was a multiracial group. Somebody's just asked.
Could you say more about the sense of liberation that the group found from this work?
Yeah, I think you know, anytime we do any work on mindfulness or any sort of internal, like, contemplative practice, one of the things we do is we start to realize what's going on within us. We start to say, wow, I've got these thoughts, I've got these narratives. And I think the liberating thing was to say, wow, I've thought that before, you know, I've had that prejudice, and to also notice that is both part of us because it's in us, but it's also not the whole of us, and it's also changeable, and we can start to see where that comes from. That, you know, you get racial coding happening since you're a kid, of course you're going to get to the point where as an adult you still have that within you. So it's liberating to be able to find it in yourself, not like it, not want it to be there, but then be able to say, oh God, I can see this, and then disrupt it yourself, and see it in others, and disrupt it in others, and build up more emotional, like, resilience to be able to do that, and better language to be able to make arguments as well. When somebody says something that does have a racial undertone or a racist undertone, to actually say, oh, do you realize what you're saying there? You know, to have the confidence to be able to start to even call in friends and family and other people, you know, the confidence to do that, the language to do that, the resilience to do that.
Interesting. On another facet of language, I noticed early on in your talk, you came up with all sorts of terms. It was like a new dictionary of terms to apply to this, sort of like with each of which must have a definition, which has actually mapped out the territory in a new way, I take it.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the challenge, is that there are lots of definitions and there are lots of elements to this, and it's a complex path, and it doesn't look the same in every country, in every context, and not everybody has the same view about what all of these terms are. But I think broadly speaking, it's about being able to say what really resonates with me. Where can I see myself perpetuating a silence, for example? Where can I see myself being apathetic? Where can I see myself tone policing, and knowing what those terms are and being able to see them? So not so worried about what the definition is, but more is this something that I can see in myself, and do I want that to be part of myself, or do I want to shift beyond that?
Somebody's picked up on the fact that you didn't manage to get so many men along, and wants to know how you could encourage that to happen. Do you have any ideas?
Oh, it's a good question. Yeah, I think it was interesting that people who come from other identities, like women, people from the members of the LGBTQI community, it felt like there was already an understanding of ways in which we're oppressed, and so more of a sense of affinity or a lived experience of some of the ways in which you get discriminated against on the basis of other identity characteristics. So in a way, with men, it was sometimes more challenging. I don't know, maybe it's worth there being male-led groups, that could be one option. But I also think that the reality, I don't know, maybe with more men that come to the groups, they can encourage other people to do the work, so it becomes sort of fulfilling in that way. And also, people are having children. People are not wanting to pass on these ideologies. They don't want this to be the case. So we also have to think about it generationally.
Right. There's a question to ask you if you'd say more about the role of the oversight group.
Yeah, so the oversight group was there for various purposes. One was kind of a group for me to sort of talk to about what I was doing, how I was setting the groups up, where I was setting the groups up, and what material we were covering. And some of the members of the oversight group, including Dean and Aisha, who are here, also contributed material that we could explore. But also those members of the oversight group were also people who were part of the 4 groups that I approached. So the idea was also to have some support in thinking about, we did these whiteness groups as small groups of people, but actually we did them with groups, like, for example, who are part of a network or a part of an organization, and obviously that organizational network would want to be doing this work as well. So the members of the oversight group were also there, and we were talking about, but what does this work look like in the bigger context? How can change happen at that organizational level? And where could this whiteness work fit into that bigger picture? And so we had quite a few conversations about that. So that was kind of the main purpose of it, and also just to sort of help me talk through some of the challenges, some of the emotional issues that arose from me also doing the work with people. It was hard to do the work as well, and hard to listen to people's views, and hard sometimes to deal with issues that came up. So I got some individual support from people around that too.
Sounds like an important aspect of the whole project. Amazing work. I know, so tricky, but are you able to review or measure the impact of the conversations as an output of the project, or for steps to move forward?
I think, the very nature of evaluation these days tends to be very sort of measurable in the way we think about the way we even think about measuring change is it's kind of an interesting phenomenon in and of itself. Yes. And I think for me, it's more like what I feel are the impacts of this, like feeling that people have developed a sense of trust and connection, feeling that people are becoming more comfortable around this language, that they feel more committed to it, that they're thinking about, well, how do I make change now? I understand this is happening to me. How do I contribute to change? Not knowing the answers, but feeling more galvanized, more energetic, more having greater understanding or a longer sense of commitment. And in the oversight group, similarly, like just seeing the way that the group came together, many of them didn't know each other, and just the sense of sort of camaraderie and solidarity and commitment, the sense of being on a really long journey together, having found our own allies, being comfortable in a multiracial space to work on this together. I think those are some of the things that are the biggest impacts of the project, and they're much more about emotion in a way than about sort of some of the standard sort of things like a particular output,
Yeah. Tough one to measure. Yeah, but absolutely. Well, you're conveying it very well anyway. Yeah, clearly totally passionate about it. So look, we're going to have to leave it there. It's break time. So thanks very much, Paula, for presenting your project. It's obviously gone down a storm with everybody, created lots of thinking. There's still things pouring in on the comments here. Thanks a lot. So our first 3 projects, plenty of food for thought there. We're going to have a break now, but do please stay connected. We'll be showing a photographic medley of highlights from Emergence funded projects during the break. So this will be followed by a video made by Mark Pell of Janie Rosenwald's Arwen Sanctuary project in Outer West Wales, which takes us on a pictorial walk into the tranquility of nature. The entire show will be shown twice, so you've got plenty of time to go and make yourself a cuppa without missing anything. And this will take us up to the second part of the event, which begins at 4 p.m. So don't be late, as I'll be taking us straight into the next presentation.
Right, so I've got 3 ponies on the fields this winter. They came on a few weeks ago. They're rather late, but they will graze the meadows until late March, and they help to keep the grass down so that the wildflowers can come. Otherwise the grass suppresses them. And a lot more wildflowers came this year in the meadows. It was really lovely to see varieties that I haven't seen before.
What am I doing? I am trying to mend a piece of this living bridge. Trying to. Oh, I need to take it out first.
Firstly, I learned what a forest garden actually is, because I didn't have much idea of what that was beforehand. So I learned about the different tiers in planting, so starting with the larger trees and then the shrubs and then going down, and how everything's edible or like useful, and how you're going to incorporate that into your life here, and how that then incorporates into the community aspect as well. So how people can come in and use this garden to be living in a more sustainable way for the future and that kind of thing. So
I think confidence is a really big one, because I wasn't sure, if I could keep up all the workload for 2 weeks, and I haven't had a problem with that at all. So that's been really good to know that I can just about keep up with a 22-year-old. It's not bad at 51. So, and that confidence is something that I really wanted to find out about that, about my energy levels, because one day I would love to have my own, as you know, my own bit of land one day. But that would be quite a big undertaking at this age, I think, and just I want to know, is it going to be okay for me to do that? And so by being here for 2 weeks, that's shown me that, I can do a lot of things and I'm all right. I think you've given me a lot of inspiration as well in relation to that. You're older than me, your energy levels are amazing. You've done so much here in quite a short space of time. So I feel like you're a bit of a role model in terms of that, and that's given me more encouragement to go ahead and do that if I get the chance.
Okay, so this is the pond that was dug last year. It hasn't been lined at all, it's just clay. So, and you can see how well the water level is really high. And it's attracting all sorts of wildlife. There was frog spawn in the spring. There's now dragonflies and damselflies. There's a lovely blue one here. There's some red ones there. There's all kinds of vegetation around the edges, and it just really enhances this this field, which was just rather boggy before and inaccessible. And the horses drink from here as well, they really like it. So there's shallow bits and deeper bits, so it attracts different wildlife. Mostly the shallow bits are the richer areas, and there's a stork that heron that flies here and helps itself to whatever from the pond.
it's about connectedness, and and the balance of the land and mind, body and spirit, which I found just rings totally true for this place. And the name Arwen Sanctuary is just absolutely in line with this piece of land and my experience from it. It's aligned my mind, my body and my soul again, and it's definitely been a sanctuary, a safe place, a grounding place. Yeah, and it's just been a wholesome experience, which kind of rings true to the name Arwen.
It's a wonderful day because today was really the first time we were able to profile our pilot round of grantees.
What we've really wanted to achieve with this day was to connect with people we have given grants to the organisations, and find out what had happened. To see the range of projects and how different they all are, and how they've all got their own particular quality and bringing something really special and unusual and slightly different to culture, to the world. I mean, I think that was really exciting to see.
I'm really inspired by the breadth of the projects and just how many people have been touched or impacted by a relatively small amount of money.
100% supportive, fantastic. They helped us with the application to get it just right, and supported us through, and here we are, we spent the money, got a great result.
It's just been beautiful to be in a room with so many people who are doing such, on the surface, diverse and different things, and yet underneath there's an energy that seems common and that seems shared.
Exciting, inspiring, and the whole idea of helping society to find the spark of how we all can reach our human potential to really change the world to be a better place.
But what's been really nice is being in a room with people that you immediately feel safe and comfortable and you're all on the same page. But you can go and sit down at a table and not know anybody, and people immediately start talking to you, and everyone's interested and supportive of everybody.
Amazingly important kind of seed funding to do a big idea. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that slideshow and various videos in the break there. Getting a little taste of the enormous breadth of what Emergence has been supporting. And variety is the flavour of the day. Completely different project coming up for project number 4. So if John and Elaine and Martin would just put their hand up so we can find them. John Hall is going to introduce the project. It's called Outsider Music, Outsider Sound and Spirit, enabling those left behind by normal services to develop creativity and self-awareness towards a music-based performance. So welcome, John, Elaine, and coming up, are we all there? Not quite. There we go. Great. Very good. So it's Martin. Yeah, big welcome to you all. And I'll hand over to you, John. Do you want to introduce your project?
Okay, thanks very much for inviting us here to the event. Yeah, my name is John Hall. I'm a music producer, music therapist, and founder of Outsider Music Community Interest Company. And we have Elaine and Martin. Would you like to say hi, Elaine?
Hi, Elaine Collins. I'm a yoga therapist and psychotherapist and work in the mind, body and mindfulness space. And that was a part that I contributed to the project. And we've lost Martin.
Oh, okay, I'm sure he'll join.
Who was, has a long background in the National Health Service as a commissioner for mental health services, and has been a huge supporter, particularly of John's work, but also in the bringing together of this, because in a way he saw the missing link in provision and was passionate from behind pushing us to create something a bit different here, and has been incredibly supportive throughout.
Yeah, so our project's called Outsider Music, Sound and Spirit, and it uses music and mind, body and spirit activities, as Elaine just said, to work alongside people struggling with mental health difficulties. Through song, music and the creation of a finished product, it helps people to build self-confidence, motivation, agency, and gives people something they can be proud of. It cultivates resilience, and through peer support, recognition and appreciation, people find themselves. I've done a lot of projects in hospitals and in the community, and I think with just music therapy, it can do great things. But what we wanted to do is extend the support for people through this project by integrating Elaine's mind, body and spirit work. And we were delighted to get the grant from the Emergence Foundation to run the project, and it's been great. And here's a short 5-minute video which shows some of the highlights of the work from the project.
आहिस्ता आहिस्ता मुझे यकीन हो गया आहिस्ता आहिस्ता ये दिल में ही खो गया गिरा गिरा You are my light, so bright, you bring me joy, fulfill my life. I need you in my sight, you bring me joy, fulfill my life. You are my light, so bright, you bring me joy, fulfill my life. I need you in my sight, na 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 I'm broken. Now my life is broken. I was shattered and broken.
I just live my life only solo. My life is very solitary life. Only me, myself, and I, with my own solitude and my own solitary life. And it is like a solitaire ring. I keep going round and round and round, the same vicious circles and the same vicious cycles of repetitive habits that are making my own habitats. I keep repeating myself.
I'm fat and I see it. If you're really cannot be fit, fix me and clear out the item. Right eye delusion, it helps me really very much. My whole life has changed through this project as I was working on. I mean, I had such little confidence at the beginning of the project. And there's so much more confidence, and I realize now that when I was feeling very guilty about things that happened to me in my past, that were quite bad. And now I have confidence to face those demons now.
This time I'm fixing for the best. This is me. I'm here, stitching for the side. Take a look at me. Precious brown nights, you can't fit me. Brought down my back just to ride it.
Blissful desire. Enter sunshine.
You've got to be there, you've got to attend, you've got to push through feeling alone and working alone in a room or wherever, and you've got to make it happen even though you're not surrounded by people. So it's not, you know, it's some level of resilience and discipline that I'm building, at least through this. And I reckon that when we do meet again, I'm going to be, for one, a little bit stronger for it. Because when I'm with you, when we're at the studio, I rely a lot more on you just to make something sound great. Whereas when we do this, it's a lot more homework for me just to make it happen. And then you can make it sound great as well on top of that. But it's making me do more work, which I think is better. It's better.
It gave me so much confidence, and I thought, oh, I've done that. And actually getting a CD in my hand with my name on it is like validation. It wasn't a mirage.
Mother Nature, 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 Mother Nature keeps me alive. Mother Nature makes me so high. Mother Nature, can't you see? If you can't hug a human, hug a tree. Yeah.
So I guess from if I'd sort of say a bit about the music side, and then perhaps Elaine could say something about her work. I feel one of the most significant parts of this work is a kind of change in perception or shift in gaze that's experienced by public and professionals who get to see people's hidden talents, their assets, rather than seeing them through the lens of a kind of clinical diagnosis or their deficits. People are really seeing people as people. And when I first came across this when I was working in the hospital, and I take my work in to show a video to the clients I've been working with, and it's actually the staff were so blown away with what they saw, and they'd immediately see people in a different light. And I think this is one of the things that's really powerful about this work. And so how does it actually work? Well, I think when you get people to record something or write a song, when they're actually recording, it's actually hard work to do that because they're trying to get it right. So in a way, it's galvanizing their enthusiasm. It requires concentration, hard work, effort, and enthusiasm. And a lot of time people are, people don't want to do things. They're stuck. They're sort of feeling very isolated. But using this kind of system, it's a way of sort of translating their stories into songs and tracks, and the whole thing becomes a kind of celebration for them. And I also think, music motivates people because they love it. So it's a sort of Trojan horse in a way of getting people to kind of come out of themselves and suddenly come alive and start working out what they might want to be. So I think it's sort of taking them some of the way along. And then I think what we've done working with Elaine as well is putting something else around too. I guess perhaps you could say a bit more about that, Elaine.
Yeah, I think what this grant did was it gave us some freedom to realise and build on some intuitions that we'd had as individual therapists working with groups and individuals, that, you know, we have the evidence base, we have the experience, but we felt that there was something more that could be realized by addressing the whole person. And, you know, in most organizational setups, you know, we're explicitly veering away from the spiritual, or, you know, we're dealing with managing emotions rather than expressing them. And so this really gave people an opportunity to explore all of that. And by working on the mind, body and spirit simultaneously, I was doing a weekly class with them. And for people who would have found it actually quite hard to do a group endeavor at the beginning, in the online experience actually worked for them, because they could choose when they were on camera, when they weren't. And under the guise of you know, increasing our confidence, our breath work, our range of sort of presentation, we had several ways into the spiritual that was with the purpose of enhancing how people would come to the music therapy. And by joining up these different modes of support, I think we were able to deliver something sort of greater than the sum of its parts. And that was where our volunteers and also all the participants actually came together to create a community around these activities that weren't just isolated spots in the week. There were ongoing conversations. And we've seen that even since the official completion of the process, where we've got a next steps group that has continued under their own steam. And I think that's something, Martin, you've been facilitating, might want to say something about.
Yes, I think that this project was able to reach a group of people who are often labelled by mental health services, but often really left behind, and to show that as well as music, there's the opportunity for people to connect as individuals and to grow as individuals through mind-body work, and by implication for other sorts of work as well. But it helps us to realise that just a single programme or a repeat programme needs to help people to continue that work, both recognising the importance of music and other forms of mind-body work, but also moving on to other forms of being themselves, demonstrating and living their skills and confidence in their community networks, starting off in their social networks, meeting people, maybe linking in through other community groups and sometimes mental health groups or recovery colleges and so on.
Yeah, and I think for me, in projects I've done in the past, which have been mainly through music, I've always wanted this peer support and an ongoing thing to develop. And I think this project round is really, we're really seeing that happening with the agency and the people themselves to want to do things. And yeah, it's very exciting the way it's worked out.
Amazing. Look, what a great project. You're getting fantastic comments coming up in the chat here about it. People love it. And, you know, music's got such power to go to places that other things don't really, isn't it? It's like one of those amazing left field things that gets past other, you know, places that other things don't. I'm going to sneak in with a question of my own before I start weighing into these, which I'd just like to hear at least one of the backstories of those pieces of music that we heard there. Maybe, John, could you tell us, you know, a little bit about what was going on there? Who did it? What? How they did it? You know what? Yeah, all about it.
Okay. Well, one particular person who came up with the track "Mother Nature." She'd never written a song before. She hadn't even sung. She'd sung in a choir, but she didn't know anything about the idea of creating a song. Never done it before, and didn't actually believe that she'd be able to do it. And in the early stages of the project, when I was trying to set up Zooms, I mean, now Zoom is something that we're all sort of aware of, and we've got very good at running it, like this event, for example. But back a few months, people were really rubbish at connecting on Zoom. And this one particular person was saying, I really don't think I'm going to be able to carry on in this project because I have such problems connecting through Zoom. And I encouraged her and kept her going. And then she told me the story about how Mother Nature, she felt, was really helping her during her kind of lockdown period, where she just felt so bad. But what she'd do, she'd go out into nature, and nature would kind of make her feel better. So what we did is, one of the guys played a bit of harmonica, someone else played a bit of guitar, and through a kind of collaborative thing, we sort of got the whole song together. And she sung it. She can't even believe that she's actually sung it. She's gone on to do 2 other songs, and it's just a fantastic way this project works. Once you instill enthusiasm into somebody, it's amazing what they can do, and they start to really believe in themselves.
I think that
very moving story.
Example of how the two things came together as well, because we'd been doing visualizations about our safe places and the places where we feel joy inside ourselves, and seeing some of those themes then cropping up in the music that people were creating sort of was real validation of bringing those modalities together.
Amazing. So look, let's weigh into the chat here. So inspiring. Are there plans for the project to continue into the future, and if so, what way?
There are a number of ways, and I think perhaps Martin, you're best to describe the sort of things that we're looking at the moment.
Yeah, well, one of the great things is that a project like this generates ideas, but most immediately we're seeking to join up with another community music organisation in Haringey to sort of team up to get a better identity and a greater basis for community music. We'd also like to expand the peer support element of the work, because some of the people through the experiences that John's described have become keen on linking up with other community groups or carrying on as their own peer support group. So those are amongst the things we'd like to continue to do. In the longer term, it seems as though there should be a fit for this type of work with what the government policy calls social prescribing, so that people can link up with a music project which suits their own recovery from physical or mental illness.
So in case anybody doesn't know what social prescribing is, it's the newfound ability that GPs have to actually prescribe something like this project instead of some drugs. So it's an amazing new direction for medicine. I love this project as it breaks out of the medical model that tends to restrict creativity. How did you select the first participants?
We didn't select them. They sort of selected us and were referred. Some were already known to us through other activities. And then organisations like Mind, Age UK referred people. John, do you want to talk about the people who came through your
also, connections I've got through hospital work and various organisations. So often when people know that there's a project's coming up, they're sort of desperate to get referrals in. So no, it wasn't hard. It was, and it's been great the way it's worked out.
Great. Okay. Well, look, that's time up. Fabulous project. Thank you so much for sharing about it. And great again to be able to support it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so on to project 5. Jamie, could you put your hand up? You have already. It's well ahead. Very good. So Jamie Bristow, the Mindfulness Initiative. So this is about policy research on how mindfulness training can influence international responses to the environmental crisis through generating a shift from an atomistic to a holistic perspective. Jamie, lovely to meet you, and thanks very much for coming on today to tell us about this.
Yes, lovely to meet you too, Robin, and really good to see so many of you here today. A pleasure to be able to share our work, and the least we could do really with the gratitude that we have for the Emergence Foundation making this work possible. So I'd like to show some slides. Good, they're coming up. Here we go. So yeah, first slide, please. As I'm going to tell you a bit of background about our organisation. Sorry, next slide, please. A bit of background about our organisation, and then I'll sort of focus in on the project in question. So it all begins in 2013, when the British Parliament started receiving, or MPs and members of the House of Lords started receiving mindfulness classes. And since then, 300 or so politicians have been on an 8-week mindfulness course. And after about 18 months or so, after that first few programs, getting on for 10 years ago now, the politicians started to become interested in the science behind what they'd learned, the benefits they started to feel in their own lives. And it's quite common when you get that positive experience, you want to share it with others. So their minds went to how they could share it. And that is, of course, through public policy and public services. So next slide, please. I was one of the volunteers and experts who came together to help the politicians to create the all-party parliamentary group on mindfulness. And since then, early 2014, I've been supporting them to run policy inquiries, looking at how mindfulness could be applied in different areas of public life. And this culminated in the world's first public policy report about mindfulness training. Next slide, please. Called the Mindful Nation UK, and this is available along with all of the other work that we do for free on our website at themindfulnessinitiative.org. And this report pulled together the evidence, the sort of scientific evidence. We're now up to about 8,000 academic papers on mindfulness, with the state of the implementation, the innovation in the space, matching that to public policy concerns. And we particularly looked at health, education, criminal justice, and the workplace. And so back then it was really quite sort of targeted to where the evidence base was strongest. For instance, tackling recurrent depression or chronic pain. And in schools, looking at well-being and mental health. Over time, we and the politicians that we work with became interested in what kind of was underlying these often quite kind of disparate applications of mindfulness. So sometimes it's kind of used as a reason to dismiss mindfulness as something that's being applied as a panacea, just because there are so many different applications in different areas of life. But that's kind of missing this perhaps more foundational thing that mindfulness as a normal natural human capacity that can be cultivated is bringing to our lives. Next slide, please. And so over the last few years particularly, we have worked with politicians and other sort of decision makers, thought leaders, to look at a framework for understanding how mindfulness might be core to meeting the challenges of our times. And we published at the end of last year a document called Mindfulness Developing Agency in Urgent Times, really focusing on how mindfulness can underpin intentional action, not just in a siloed application, but more broadly in a kind of like population level. Next slide, please. And so one of the kind of challenges that we're facing, perhaps the greatest challenge that we face, is of course the climate crisis. And so the next sort of natural step is to go from the kind of thinking work that we've been doing to looking at okay, let's look at public policy now. What can we say about mindfulness and how it could help us to increase responsiveness and resilience to the climate crisis? And it just so happens actually that the evidence has progressed in this area around sustainability and pro-environmental behavior enough where we can actually create, we feel, a review of that evidence with some recommendations for government and other national and international institutions. building on this work of around agency that we've been doing over the last few years. Next slide, please. And so that's where the Emergence Foundation have come in and helped us to conduct research, where we have we've been working with Professor Christine Wamsler of the Lund University Center for Sustainability Studies. Oh, I should mention, actually, when I say we, the Mindfulness Initiative is like a think tank. We're now an education charity and policy institute, which supports the all-party parliamentary group on mindfulness, but is different from it. So the Mindfulness Initiative has been working with Lund University to review the research in the area. Next slide, please. To survey the kind of innovation in the space, like you've heard from Paula today, doing some really valuable innovation work, taking mindfulness training and applying it to new outcomes, really targeting particular kind of social outcomes. We've looked at the kind of innovation that's particularly relevant to sustainability. Next slide, please. And we're also conducting a very wide consultation of academics, innovators and policymakers in order to both kind of like find innovations that we haven't seen before, but also to understand the policy context and how people are currently thinking about it, what language they're using, how they see the inner dimension of the climate crisis, or at all, if at all. And that's one of the main sort of findings, as we somewhat expected, that actually mainstream policy thinking is only just cottoning on really to the really fundamental aspect of the inner dimension being a fundamental aspect of what's going on, both in terms of the problem and in terms of what we can do about it. Okay, next slide, please. And we also have spoken to 15 leading experts. Caroline Lucas, being a vice chair of the all-party group on mindfulness, was obviously very keen to take part, as well as directors from global NGOs, thought leaders, writers, and people from in the civil service, nationally and sort of transnationally. Next slide, please. And so, like we have in the past, after Mindful Nation UK, we've created a number of quite influential policy reports and publications. We're going to pull these three aspects together once again: the research, the innovation in the space, and how it's currently considered by policymakers. Like, what's the right language to be using to match it to their thinking, so we can make the case for using mindfulness to increase responsiveness. And we're going to publish a report later this year. Next slide. And hopefully we've applied to be present at the COP conference in November, if it goes ahead face to face, and this kind of thing is possible, where we'll try and engage policymakers with our work. And this is the beginning of a process. Once you create a report like this, you can't just assume that everyone who should read it will read it. And so we'll spend the next couple of years or so engaging people with it, but hopefully giving it a good launch later on in the year. Final slide, please. And this, if you're interested in this project, there's a bit of a write-up about it. I will drop a link in the chat. And again, have a browse of all of our other documents there, which are free to download, or you can buy them inexpensively in print online. Okay, thanks again for listening today. And once again, yeah, deep gratitude for making this important work possible to the Emergence Foundation.
It's a pleasure, Jamie. Yeah, great. What an incredible project. It was a second climate change project, but seriously different angle to the Cumbria, from grassroots to kind of top down. Can I ask, how many people are involved directly with your project, and how much of a network of people are there around the world working in the kind of way that you're working?
So I'm used to kind of like, good Zoom etiquette and muting myself as soon as I finish speaking, but that's obviously not right now. So on this project specifically, we have 4 people. So myself and the professor, and then we have a research assistant and a more senior researcher working at present. In terms of We've discovered a lot of work going on, and we have one of the things that we're hoping to contribute is a kind of map of everything that's going on with a table of programs in the appendix, and that itself is going to be valuable. Most of it is pretty early stage, as in people have done a few pilots, they're doing some research. There's one really promising example actually being partly funded by the European Commission, called the Climate Leaders Programme, or in other terms, the Inner Green Deal. And so, yeah, I'd say maybe something like 20 to 30 programs that we're aware of that are directly looking at bringing contemplative practice and inner capacity development to sustainability.
Well, it's a whole happening that I'm personally completely unaware of it before now. Really interesting. And as you say, it's very early days maybe with this, but where do you think the biggest inroads are being made?
Well, again, the European Commission is doing some very innovative stuff, and as part of that, they've put out a call for bids rather. That includes, for the first time, wanting to hear from inner development, inner capacity building programs, and the real leverage point is around mindsets. So this is like, one example of the difference could be, are human beings at the top of a pyramid in dominion over the rest of the earth and over other people who don't look like us, perhaps? Or are we enmeshed in the harmonic web of life where everything has a kind of interaction because everything's interconnected? Now, that kind of mindset shift, it looks like, is facilitated by mindfulness, and particularly mindfulness in coordination with nature connection. And so getting people into nature with a mindful element at scale, funded hopefully, but not by themselves, but by government through our policy report and our recommendations, would be a realistic 3-year sort of pilot anyway aim.
Sounds like forest bathing, the Japanese pursuit of actually sort of meditation in nature. Right, look, there's lots of questions rolling in here. What have you found does galvanize people's passion to change?
Well, it's a really, really big question there. Wow. I mean, the element that mindfulness can bring, perhaps I'll sort of focus on that, because many different areas I could approach that question from. For myself, I went from working in advertising and being a black knight of consumerism to working in a climate change campaign, and I credit my mindfulness practice for that. And the reason I wanted to change, I heard the same stats I'd heard many times before, but I had a greater level of sensitivity and openness to challenging information. And that's one of the, mindfulness isn't just attention training, it's got particular qualities. And that's openness, curiosity, and care. That's what makes it mindfulness rather than some other form of awareness. And it's that openness to challenging or novel information that we might have otherwise shut down and not wanted to hear, that could be critical to changing views and changing behavior.
Interesting. Okay, great work you're doing, Jamie. Historically, mindfulness has a spiritual background. Does this figure in your work, and how do practitioners such as MPs relate to it?
Well, the tone in Parliament over the last 7 years has become very spiritual. I mean, there's a regular sitting group every 5:30, at least it was until recently, on Tuesdays, and the group of committed practitioners, maybe sort of particularly 30 to 40 or so, who keep coming back in a particular group, cross-party. It really is a touching and bringing more of themselves into politics and finding different ways of relating cross-party ways. And I say there's a spiritual element to that for sure. The question about, to what extent is mindfulness a psychological capacity, which is natural and, we were kind of born with it, or is it a training program which has its roots in spiritual traditions? That's around sort of language and definitions. I think there is definitely an inquiry within the mindfulness sector going on about how much is it okay to make explicit that a kind of a spiritual component, an ethical component, how much should that be implicit and embodied by the teachers? Because particularly if you're going into schools, that you have a kind of you have a responsibility to sort of check what kind of frameworks you're bringing in, and you don't want to trigger a kind of immune response from the powers that be.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. Are you happy with the extent of the impact the project's having on the kind of polarization evident in the political sphere?
Well, there is some nascent scientific evidence that mindfulness reduces polarization. I'm aware of some that's pre-publication that's going to be really exciting when it comes out. So that's sort of academically, and there is a lot of anecdotal accounts from politicians who say that mindfulness helps us to disagree better, the three things that they most mention is it helps us to respond, not react. So respond creatively rather than blindly out of habit or impulse. It helps them to have respect for other people who have differing views. They say they can see how they got to that position, even if they still don't agree with it, because they're connecting at their kind of level of shared humanity and sort of see, well, they see where they're coming from. And the other one is perspective taking more broadly. And these things, keeping things in perspective and seeing things from different perspectives, and these three things seem to lead to a better relationships and a more considered approach to exchanges of differing views.
Sounds like what we could do within politics to me. Could you give us an example of the impact on specific political groups or individuals?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few politicians, when they first went on the course back in 2013-14, they'd say, look, I'll come along, just don't tell anybody. Like it was a risky thing, because who knows how it would be perceived by the Daily Mail. But increasingly they want to talk about it whenever they can. And one or two have talked about their own personal journeys. One particularly, the real leader of this in Parliament was Chris Ruan, who was described in the press as a knuckle-dragging bruiser and one of the worst hecklers in Parliament. His colleagues said he was disruptive, to almost like a value to him. And now he's sort of completely the opposite and really thinks that things should be done differently, and says and credits mindfulness to that entirely. And then on the other side of the House, politicians have also said, yes, it's made me, real strong Brexiteers still, really believing in Brexit, but noticeably different, and in the chamber saying, let's calm down, actually making an intervention in the House of Commons, trying to take the kind of heat out of when it's getting unskillful.
Amazing. Well, the mention of the Daily Mail there, that somebody does actually comment, it'd be good for mindfulness to work to morph into journalism too.
And that's the main thing keeping this back, I have to say. Like when there was news recently that the House of Commons did another RFP, a request for bids to provide mindfulness training, and the Daily Mail is like, why are we spending money on our politicians? They just don't. Then there isn't sort of an understanding that we need to cultivate the better angels of our nature, particularly amongst leaders. And so yeah, the fear of the Daily Mail is one of the greatest checks on progress in
interesting. I don't think it's only there. Lots of walks of life, that's true. Right, we're out of time, Jamie. Thank you very much. Another fascinating project, really different again. And I can see by the engagement that everybody's really appreciated. So thanks very much for coming on.
Bye. Okay,
straight on to Project 6. Mia and Elizabeth, if you're there already, really good. So this is Mia Eskeland, Elizabeth Karamakail of Amala. This is a transformational learning program in agency to enable refugee youth in Athens to make positive change in their communities. So straight over to you, Mia, to introduce the project.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Mia, and I'm the co-founder of Amala. And we received a grant from the Emergence Foundation 2 years ago to run these transformational educational programs in Greece with refugees and unaccompanied minors. And so I'm really excited to be here today to introduce you to the project together with my colleague Elisabeth, who's in Greece. Next slide, please. Before we get into the detail of the project, there's a few words I'd like to say about why we believe that refugee education is important. And if we could have the next slide, please. Yeah. The refugee population globally has grown rapidly in the last decade, and there are now nearly 80 million people who are displaced around the world. With this growing refugee population, there's a real education crisis too. For young people who are refugees, education opportunities are severely limited, and less than 1 in 3 refugees globally complete any form of secondary education. But for many refugees, the kind of education that they get also isn't serving them very well in terms of developing their agency, self-development, and building sustainable futures. And you could also say that it's not serving the world very well in terms of educating responsible young people who can and will make a positive difference in the world. Next slide, please. I think maybe we skipped a slide. That's okay. We founded Amala 4 years ago. Our mission is to use and inspire positive change in the lives of refugees and their communities. And we run different kinds of educational programs in refugee settings around the world, and one of those countries is Greece. So why did we choose Greece? Well, many of you will probably remember the photos of refugees and migrants coming to Greece via small boats and dinghies back in 2015, 2016. Those boats are still arriving, maybe not in quite as many big numbers, but there are today more than 100,000 refugees living in Greece, and it's believed that about 50% of those will be staying for the long term. The majority are young people, they're under 30, and they've come to seek safety and build a future in Europe for themselves and their families. Access to education here is also a big challenge, especially for those over 16 who are often excluded from any form of formal education. And for those young people, life in Greece can be really hard. People tend to live in shelters, they work in low-paid and exploitative employment conditions. And because many don't speak Greek fluently either, integrating into local communities is hard, and so there's a lot of isolation. Amala's education programs focuses on developing young people's sense of ethical agency, and we deliver education that is relevant to the lives that young people lead. And we aim to give young people the skills to make a positive difference, both to themselves, but also to their communities. So we thought that our programs could make a big impact here. So with those words, I'd like to hand over to Elisabeth, who's right now in Athens, and she's been implementing this project on the ground.
Thank you, Mia.
I think I'd like to ask for the next slide.
Thanks very much. Okay, and one more, please. There was a... Yeah, perfect, thanks very much. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Elisabeth. So I will tell you a little bit more about the actual project. So the project we ran with the support of the Emergence Foundation was the implementation of Amala's short courses, which enable out-of-school displaced youth to get back into learning, develop agency, and a range of transferable skills. So between October 2019 and July 2020, we ran a total of 5 10-week-long courses, and 4 of those were blended learning courses and 1 was online. And they were courses in English for change makers, peace building in your community, living peacefully, ethical leadership, and online ethical leadership, which was the course we ran online. So although the first, could I have the next slide, please? Although the first round of courses was concluded smoothly, the second round was directly impacted by COVID-19. So when the pandemic reached Europe and lockdown started being imposed in Greece, we had to suspend the 2 blended learning courses that we were running in Athens at the time. We made the decision to start converting all the curriculum to online learning. And while waiting for the lockdown to be lifted, and once curriculum conversion had advanced, we decided to start an online ethical leadership course for a new cohort of students. The online course allowed us to reach students in other parts of Greece and even one in Turkey. We also decided not to continue online with the 2 courses which we had initially suspended until we could return to the classroom. That decision was made because the majority of students already on those courses had insufficient access to the internet, and movement restrictions and closed shops meant that we couldn't find ways to support them with data. So we wanted our approach to be as fair and equitable for our students as possible. Once the lockdown was lifted, we were able to resume and complete the 2 blended learning courses. And the timing was such that we were also able to facilitate the move of 2 of our students from the blended to the online ethical leadership course, as they had moved to rural Greece for work reasons at the time that the course was suspended. Despite the challenges and suspension of courses, we had 100% retention rate. So all learners who were on the courses before the lockdown returned once the lockdown was lifted and completed the course. Could I have the next slide, please? So 71 students enrolled and 47 students graduated. We had students who were between the ages of 16 and 22, most of whom were out of formal school. Most of them have come to Greece on their own, and some were unaccompanied minors. They lived in all different arrangements, from semi-independent and apartment programs to camps. Some were in very precarious conditions of homelessness too. Our students came from various places, mainly from Afghanistan and Sierra Leone. Could I have the next slide, please? So when it comes to the impact, I would say that there are 3 main areas: the impact on the students, the impact on the Amala educational model, and the impact on our partnership activity. With regards to the impact on our students, they overall reported a very positive learning experience and a sense of belonging to the Amala community that was inclusive and supportive. The skills that they mentioned as particularly important were around facilitating dialogue, especially between people with different opinions, presenting themselves and their ideas, and mediating conflict. Many said that those were particularly important because they could use them with daily challenges they faced within their communities, for example, with roommates or peers. Although some found discussions around well-being strange at first, there was a very positive response to conversations about self-care and emotional awareness, particularly as part of the Living Peacefully and Ethical Leadership courses. Students talked about how this was an area that they hadn't had the opportunity to reflect much about in the past, but which they found very relevant and important. One student said that his understanding of how his emotions influenced his behavior was very helpful in choosing when to interact with others and when to take some time for himself. In that way, he explained he's better able to avoid conflict and have kinder relationships. Our alumni went on to pursue further education and projects in the 6 months following the completion of Amala courses. We have an alumnus who has started his own clothing brand, Khalil, who followed our peace building course. We have an alumnus studying a bachelor's in computer science at the University of the People, and another studying a bachelor's in international hospitality management at New York College in Thessaloniki in the north of Greece. Before I end the presentation, I also briefly want to mention what we see as the more unintended positive impact of this project, which relates to our educational model and our partnership activities. So when it comes to the impact on our educational model, the Amala educational model became much more flexible. We now offer both online and blended learning programs, and we have also seen how those two can complement each other and provide a pathway for course completion, even if the place of residence of the students changes, which is of high importance because the population we work with is often on the move. We have also developed a number of important partnerships in Greece during that time. A highlight of those is our closer collaboration with the Special Secretariat for the Protection of Unaccompanied Minors of the Greek Ministry of Migration and Asylum. This collaboration has enabled us to reach shelters that host unaccompanied minors all around Greece. We are currently working on providing training and capacity building to colleagues at those shelters so that they can themselves run Amala courses and we can reach more out of school youth. In the long term, we're looking at amplifying our impact by catalyzing systemic change in Greece. We hope to have Amala programs recognized by Greek authorities as a formal alternative to Greek schooling for those who are not able to attend Greek school. Final slide, please. So thank you very much, and we're looking forward to your questions.
Fantastic. Kind of project that makes you wonder what kind of world it would be if we didn't have charities struggling to fill these gaps. I mean, it's an amazingly huge gap, but you've not only been doing some incredibly practical stuff, which I can imagine is gold dust to those people you've managed to help, but you've got plans for scaling it up as well, which obviously are desperately needed. So incredible. Right, what have we got here? Elizabeth, what are the main issues you found refugees are struggling with?
Very many issues, honestly. I think it really depends where along their journey you come across people. We've had people who were struggling with getting food and having a place to sleep. We had such students. We have students who might be further along their journey and they're in slightly better conditions, who might be struggling then with feeling excluded from formal schooling or finding it really, really hard to get a job or support their family. It can be people struggle a lot with legal issues as well. There's a lot of stress about lawyers and what's going to happen with the case and all of that. So yeah, a whole lot, honestly. It really depends.
Were you able to provide them with a sense of community?
Yeah, I think this is the one thing that always comes out when we speak with the students, because we sort of follow their journey from the start till the end of the course, and community building is something that has been coming up again and again, and it is very interesting to see how students who come back to Amala when they submit an application for another course, in their motivation answer, they also always mention how that element of the community when being part of an Amala course is very, very important to them. And bear in mind that these are people that sometimes are completely alone. Like we've had homeless 16-year-old students who have come to Greece and have no one here. So it can be really, really powerful for them, is my understanding, to be part of this community.
Maybe just to add quickly, Elizabeth, I remember when we had to close down the courses for COVID, and we were worried that a lot of students wouldn't come back because we didn't know how long we might not see them for. And then after 2 months or however long it was, and everyone came back, and I think you asked one of the students, why did you come back? And someone said, I kept in touch with Amala because it's one of the only places I feel like people care about me as a person and an individual. And I think that speaks volumes to that kind of community building that Elizabeth's been able to do.
Fantastic. Okay. Did you hold the courses in many languages simultaneously? If yes, how many? And if so, do you believe it affected the learning process?
Mm-hmm. So our programs are mainly in English. They require a sort of intermediate level, so you don't have to be fluent in English to join, but you do have to speak a bit of English. There are always upsides and sort of challenges in doing that, and we are looking at translating our curriculum in other languages as well, also because we work in other settings outside of Greece. Amala has hubs in different places. So we see the value of down the line offering our curriculum in other languages as well, but at the moment they're often in English only. I don't know if Mia wants to add anything.
People are asking about other projects. You want to tell us where else you're working?
So we are working, so we have our own operations in Greece, Jordan and Kenya, but we've also worked with partners to deliver these courses in places like Trinidad and Tobago, Hong Kong, Lebanon, Malaysia, maybe a few other places, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Amazing. And how much do you tailor the courses for the country you're in? How different are they? Are they actually all quite similar?
So they're all quite similar. So we sort of have a standard set of courses that can be, so we say, deployed in different parts of the world. But then we would always have fantastic facilitators like Elisabeth, who are rooted in the local community, who are able to, shall we say, sort of translate some aspects of the curriculum so that it's more tailored to that local community. But really what we try and do in the learning is that a lot of the activities takes departure in the individual. So it's not about learning, you know, stats and facts about a certain place or a certain topic. It really starts with the learner themselves. So the education comes from them.
Right. And where was the first project?
The first project took place simultaneously in Greece, Jordan, and Kenya in 2017. Yeah.
Right. What does the Living Peacefully and Ethically program consist of?
Yeah, so maybe it's a nice way to connect it to what Mia has been saying about departing from the learner's own experiences. So the Living Peacefully course is built around the idea of understanding ourselves, understanding our emotions, and understanding how all what is happening inside us affects the way we interact with the world around us. And so we start from trying to interrogate what it is that is going on within. We start by reflecting on our own feelings and emotions, our experiences. There are in different parts of the course. We're looking at different tools, including mindfulness, on how to approach all of these, and where we are looking at how these tools can affect the way we connect with ourselves and the people around us. The ethical leadership course is more focused on what does it mean to be a leader, how a leader might have to have different roles and attitudes in different situations, and that being a leader doesn't mean that you always like tell people what to do, or like how as a leader do you make people want to follow you, how do you organize a community to enact positive change. Just like a few ideas that the courses touch upon.
Thank you. This is a wonderful project. I can imagine that these young people experience huge frustrations. Working in these educational groups, do you feel this is an advantage for developing emotional growth?
Yes, it can be. It can be. I think sometimes it is overwhelming. My experience with the people I have worked with until now is that the amount of frustrations and barriers that they're up against, especially in places like Greece that have extremely slow bureaucratic procedures, and their chances of making it are very low anyway. Can be quite overwhelming, especially for people who are young, who are here by themselves, who have no support network. But there's definitely an incredible level of resilience and sort of motivation to change the things that are wrong, that are unjust. So on that front, I would say, yeah, definitely. I don't know if Mia wants to add anything to that.
Well, yeah, no, I don't actually think I have anything to add. Thank you.
Quick last one. Could you describe how the wellness aspect of the project works?
I think wellness is quite a broad term, and in that sense, there are different ways that we could look at it. There are the more explicit ways that we discuss wellness through things like we do in Living Peacefully, or through examining well-being and self-care as a leader and what that means. But wellness, I think, is also a lot about the community that we build, and it massively is my understanding is that it massively contributes to people's well-being and to people's work around supporting others in their community as well. So I think it is an element that runs through the entire curriculum, but also our interactions as a community at large.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. A mass of questions we're not dealing with, and lots of lovely comments about the work you're doing. So much appreciated, obviously. A brilliant project. So thank you very much for telling us about it today.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're on to the last project of the day, Project 7. So Susie, you're there, great. So this is Susie Talbot from Anima Mundi Law Initiative. She's going to talk about a practical framework to help lawyers and communities embed laws within ecological realities using the emerging rights of nature approach. So you've got a video to show us. Are you going to go straight into the video, Susie? Yes. Okay, so thank you.
What would a possible future look and feel like if we recognize that humans are only one of many communities on Earth? That these communities are all interconnected in dynamic and reciprocal ways, and that our well-being as humans cannot meaningfully be separated from the well-being of the planet. This was the basis for my exploration into the emerging rights of nature movement as one important and exciting pathway towards potentially adapting and evolving our legal systems to align with and help strengthen the likelihood of bringing about this possible future. Our escalating ecological climate and related social crises are well known and documented. These didn't just happen randomly, but are very closely linked to our current activities and the practices we've adopted, relating to expectations of endless growth on a finite planet, a focus on financial profit, privatization, the overlooking of externalities, and the corporate capture of governmental decision-making, as well as the development of exponential technology. We're now at a point at which we can and do have a significantly outsized impact on our environment. And if we continue down this path, we're looking at a future with potentially catastrophic outcomes on ourselves and the planet, and even self-termination of humans as a species. This is a confronting reality to face, but I also feel that for a number of reasons we have potential for hope and transformation on a global scale, and we have choices and agency about which future we move towards. Firstly, as humans, we are highly adaptable. Unlike many other animals, we're not born and immediately able to make our own ways in the world, physically or socially. We spend a long time learning and adapting throughout our lifetimes, which has meant that humans are able to exist and thrive in all parts of the world and in vastly different circumstances. This adaptable nature relates to us as individuals, but also in our group interactions. This is really important to understand, as so many of our collective ways of making sense of the world and our collective decision-making and coordinated action, such as our financial, economic, political, agricultural, legal, and other systems, seem inevitable or static because we're generally born into these and don't really think about them or how they came about. But we built these over time, and we can dismantle them or evolve them and move towards quite radically different systems that are more appropriate and actually generative as ways of living together. Secondly, we have a growing understanding about our global interconnection. For a long time, we've had a shared story about the separation of humans from the rest of the natural world, and even our domination over everything else. This is contrary to the story held for us by many indigenous and other traditional groups, and felt by many of us, that we are inextricably linked to everything else. In recent years, we felt this connection in a more embodied sense, through more severe and significant weather events, the web of our global supply chains, and revelations of the pandemic. And also our shared scientific understanding about our bodies, about ecosystem communication, quantum mechanics, and other topics has expanded so that we can now properly understand ourselves as a process rather than a fixed object, and one that is in constant circular relationship with all life on this planet. So in this context of where we're at globally at this time, and our expanded understanding of what it means to be human, I'm really curious about how we not only take urgent steps to address our challenges, but also in parallel, how we develop other ways of living together over a generational time span. In 2017, news stories were released around the world reporting on the fact that a river in New Zealand had been recognised as a legal person and granted rights. This generated a lot of interest and also questions. What does it mean for a river to have rights? How can a river be considered a person in the law? Who speaks for the river? How can we know what the river wants or needs to realise its rights? Could this change the way we think about environmental protection and restoration, and how we live together in the world more generally? This was particularly interesting to me, as for over a decade, I'd been working as a human rights lawyer with other lawyers, NGOs, communities and social movements around the world on economic, social and cultural rights, working together to make changes in ways that wouldn't be possible to achieve alone. Although the human rights framework does deal with a lot of issues that are connected with the environment, it is, of course, largely anthropocentric in its focus and its practices. And the fields of human rights and environmental justice were actually very siloed in many ways. So I became increasingly focused on thinking about how the human rights framework and the law more broadly can more explicitly reflect the fact that all of our human activities and lives are embedded at all times in ecological realities, and how we could shift from treating nature as an afterthought within our legal frameworks. My overarching aims of the project were to investigate, understand, and amplify the rights of nature movement, and create practical tools to share my findings and encourage lawyers, activists, and others to connect with and build on these really exciting developments. So I undertook a lot of research, developed a website, and created 3 main practical tools. Firstly, I created case studies of the main examples from around the world. These have been written in a format that I think is particularly useful to lawyers, explaining the jurisdiction, type of legal protection, the facts of the case, how the rights of nature have been recognised, the significance of the development, implementation information, and also sharing links to key court documents, legislation, or other material. Secondly, I created an interactive mapping. This provides a visual of the connected story across the world of similar developments and gives people the option to click through to the specific case studies. Thirdly, I developed a report on rights of nature and practice around the world. This shares what has been happening in different contexts and also provides analysis of the cross-cutting themes that are emerging across these case studies. I wanted to break down the components of the rights of nature examples so that lawyers and others can both follow similar strategies, but also take parts of these to apply in and strengthen strategic human rights litigation or advocacy, or in other areas of law. When we're trying to build persuasive legal arguments, or we're trying to think about which remedies we ought to ask for to really address an issue, we often draw on a patchwork of relevant material from around the world. I wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to do this with this new area of law and way of thinking. So what became apparent across the case studies were 3 main lessons around how we recognize rights of nature, how we come into relationship with the more than human world, and what conditions might be helpful to support us in that process. So in terms of recognizing, I looked at what ecological entity were case studies talking about, which rights have been recognized around the world, what are the different entry points for achieving rights recognition, from litigation to constitutional drafting to legislation, how we shift in practice from thinking law is one fixed idea to recognizing the plurality of laws, and particularly how our formal legal systems can start to align more closely with Indigenous values and ways of living. In terms of relationship, the case studies revealed really interesting aspects and lessons about who speaks or acts for nature in terms of enforcing or realizing these rights in practice, how they might go about doing this, and which other communities support them in doing this. And finally, enabling. What measures are governments or others taking to support this recognition and realization of rights? Whether financial, information, communication, education, structural, or otherwise. A key part of my project was the communication of this material. All of it is available online for free for anyone who wants to read it in more detail or use it in their work. Already, the website has been visited by people in many different countries. I've also sent it out to various networks, legal, Nature Connection, feminist, and other networks, many thousands of people, and I've received very positive feedback and engagement with the material so far, and ideas about how it can be used and ways in which groups might collaborate together. I really welcome any conversations and connections in relation to this project and area of law, and I thank you for taking the time to listen.
Amazing. So, Susie, I take it that all your work there looks like a complete first. There's like, has anybody made any efforts to collaborate all the information that you've drawn together from around the planet before?
I would say not in this format. When I started to see the news reports and hear about this type of law, when I looked into it more, I really just found a lot of news reports and academic writing, and a lot of the academic writing is really fantastic. And there are a few groups, just maybe less than a handful that I know of around the world, who are helping communities draft these type of laws. But in terms of pulling together case studies that are directed towards legal practitioners in particular, and also taking a sort of a practical cross-cutting report, which brings out questions that I think can be applied, in different settings. Absolutely. About how we relate to the natural world. I haven't seen that in other spaces.
Yeah, drawing out that common information that everybody can use as a resource, incredibly important. So are there people working internationally on this kind of work in terms of driving forward, law in different countries with particular projects?
Yes, there are academics working in this area, so important to amplify this message through educational settings. And also there are a number of groups. There's a group in America, the Center for Environmental Law and Defense Fund, I think they're called, who's working specifically with local communities to try to get rights of nature into local ordinances, which can be particularly helpful when you don't have opportunities to change maybe your national legal framework.
Right. And how many of these, did you say beyond human? Was that the way you described these entities that are becoming recognized? But I'm just interested, how many of them are there at this point?
Yeah, great question. I created about, I think, close to 15 case studies. But there are more happening all the time, and definitely more local communities, Indigenous groups advocating to bring rights recognition to more entities around the world. So it seems like almost in a way like a small handful, but actually when you start to look at it as a global movement, it starts to show that these are shared stories across the world. And I should say, of course, like, this is new to the dominant legal system, but of course not new to many Indigenous and traditional legal systems around the world.
No. Right. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Questions coming in here. Right. What responses are you getting in the legal world to this radical and significant expansion of rights into nature?
Really positive responses. So as I said, I've sent it out to various targeted groups, a lot of whom are probably more receptive or who might have already heard of this approach. But certainly I've got a lot of messages back so far saying, this is something I really wanted to look into. This is something I want to align with my work. And part of what I want to do, and I think others in this field, is to really break it out of the environmental silo. Sometimes people look at anything which has the word nature or environment in the title and think, oh, well, I support it, but I'm not an environmentalist. But actually, as we go forward, we're really recognizing that all of our human activities have to be embedded in our ecological realities. So, for example, I also work in the area of corporate accountability, and I can really see the application to the growing momentum towards having mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence of companies. So where companies have to assess their, say, climate impact, the climate impact of their activities. Components from this framework can be useful in really working out, well, who should be involved in that process? What types of information should we be bringing forward or looking at? So it's at early stages. I only released these materials recently. So I think the next stage is to have more of those in-depth conversations and practical workshops and application of how do we apply this to different areas of the law.
Amazing. Real frontier stuff. Right. Catherine says, have you come across the movement to address ecocide and the work of Jojo Mehta on this? And is this part of your work?
Yeah, great question. I definitely am very aware of the ecocide movement and very supportive of it. I think this is a complementary strategy in that ecocide and rights of nature are both looking to evolve our laws to have more of a focus on environmental issues. And also they are both paradigm shifts in how we think more broadly beyond the law about our relationship with the more than human world. I have to say there are differences. Ecocide is the recognition of a crime in the law, so that it would be a crime to cause very significant environmental damage. And it's not yet present at the international level. Rights of nature, I think, is not, it does relate to disputes and dispute resolution. So it has that retrospective aspect like ecocide would. But I see it also as bringing people into relationship along daily life. So like, how do we think on a daily level about activities that might impact a river system or a mountain or a forest ecosystem? How do we think about local budgets to ensure that we have money for participatory processes to bring in the voice of nature? And also, how do we look at disputes when they happen? So I think complementary strategies.
Right. Okay, time for one more. This is so interesting, Susie. It seems to fundamentally challenge my worldview. Do you know of any move to look at the rights of the oceans?
Yes, I think one of the advocacy movements at the moment, they haven't actually achieved recognition of the rights, but it's the rights of the Salish Sea, which is I didn't know about this sea, but it's a sea which is just, I think, off the coast of where Canada and the USA meet on the west coast. So, I mean, this is a movement, and these are questions that could apply to any ecosystem. And that was, one of the interesting things about doing this research is that some countries or areas have applied this to nature generally, and then within specific cases have sort of narrowed it down. So Ecuador has given recognition to the rights of nature, and then you could have a case which focuses on the oceans, whereas other countries have perhaps given rights of nature to a particular river system or a particular lake or lagoon.
Well, I mean, starting at the top with the rights of nature is the way to go, really, isn't it? Rather than doing it piecemeal. Yeah. All right. Well, look, we're out of time. Another amazing project, Susie. Thank you so much for telling us all about it today.
That's a pleasure. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Okay. Well, look, that was the last project being presented today. I know I'm talking on behalf of all of you in thanking our presenters today. They've all told us about the amazing work they've been doing. coming at the important things of life from so many different angles. So for some closing remarks, I'm going to hand over to Alison.
Hi there, everyone. Well, wow, there's so many closing remarks. I could probably go on for about half an hour, but I've only got a few minutes. So there was something that I kind of have been thinking about in terms of the Emergence Foundation and how do we rate ourselves for success. And I really liked the first presentation that we had today, because basically she was saying that how often charities and NGOs, they use the same criteria as the sort of corporate political world. And what I felt from everything that we've heard from today, from all the different projects, is that that isn't the criteria. It's not sort of like this big success, this big impact in terms of having these big changes that get the headlines. It's actually working on a real, on all sorts of levels, but really wanting to embed change within the individual that has also effects on the wider society. So even Susie, just in terms of what you were saying, because one word that kept coming up for me that numerous projects said today was about peer support. And I thought, okay, well, you get a river and that's peer support. It's like giving the weight to people and the river as the same thing, is that peer support. So that's what, in my uninformed view of what you were talking about, that's what I got. I thought my relationship with nature, that we're peers. So that was something that, in terms of the peer support and the community building, that I felt came through so strongly today, that I feel is so much a part of what we in Emergence Foundation have we represent from our past, and what we wanted to encourage in the various projects we've supported. So I really loved it when Elizabeth said of one of the students, that they said the only place that cares about me as an individual is Amala. That says it all. It's like that community, that sense of support that's being provided for growth, for change, for fundamental relationship with life. It came through so strongly in that project, but also on the mindful action on whiteness. It was just so good to hear about all these white people, white women, challenging their own ideas about their own racism and recognizing their own framework that they had was unacknowledged, that wasn't even seen. Another word that came out quite a lot today was resilience. And I thought that's something that so much goes with our values in Emergence Foundation, is that ability to keep going, to really believe in something that we want to carry through, that's giving us strength to face the vicissitudes of what's happening. Particularly, I was thinking about the kind of division, like that's been so shown, in the UK and in the US over the last kind of while. The projects that we're talking about are just so needed. So that was my quick my run through of the projects today. And the one thing that really tickled me was in terms of the mindfulness initiative. I had this image of all the MPs sitting there in their peer support groups with each other, and are definitely across different sides of the chamber. So I'll leave you with that positive thought of people shaking hands, and maybe even post-COVID being able to give each other a hug mindfully in the future. So thank you all very much. And it's back to Robin now for a few details about how, if you want to follow up anything from today.
Thank you, Alison. Okay, well, look, there's all sorts of lovely comments coming in about the projects. very well deserved. So another round of thanks for our presenters. I also want to mention that all the hard work that's gone on behind the scenes at Emergence, putting this day together. It's been a lot of work, and that's nothing compared to the work that's gone into actually running the grant scheme, which is enormously a huge task, which has been carried out with massive dedication, mostly voluntarily. So I'd like to make a special mention to Mr. Martin Thomas, who has seriously burnt some midnight oil working on the slides and videos for today. We got some slides. Would you put up the slide? If you want to find out more about the projects we've heard from today, all the information is here on this slide. Get your smartphone out and take a quick pic of that. You can also get in touch with the team at Emergence. There's the details of Emergence Foundation at the bottom. Okay, you've done your pick of that one. On to the next slide then. So here are the important dates for round 6, our final publicised round of funding. So note the dates for round 6 is expressions of interest and for the final application. So that both of those are things you have to meet, otherwise you've missed the boat. Now note the next prospective grantee webinar with Simon Town. So Simon, you saw at the beginning, he will do a webinar to assist you in applying to the trust. So they're not to be missed if you've got any interest. To register for this, please email Simon. His email address is on this slide, grantinquiries@emergencefoundation.uk. All the application details are on the grants information web page. Simon's top advice, and this is coming from experience here, please make sure you read them in full before you apply. We really welcome all your applications, of course. We welcome any comments you've got about today's event, and there should already be a survey email waiting in your inbox, so please look out for it. If you could fill it in as soon as we finish and send your comments straight back to us, that would be really appreciated, thanks. And to finish off today, we thought it'd be nice if everybody clicks gallery view in the top right, and we're going to invite you to unmute so we can hang out for a little while together, wave to a few people we know, and so we'll leave the session running for a while. So thanks very much for coming today, and goodbye on behalf of the whole Emergence team.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Amazing. Amazing.
Amazing work, everyone.
Yeah, brilliant work. Well done, everyone. Totally inspired.
Oh, there's Nancy.
Thank you, everybody. Really wonderful.
Wow.
Mimi.
Fabulous. Fabulous to see everybody.
Really.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Incredible.
Thanks to all the presenters.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Amazing. Bye. Thank you.